Late one cool afternoon, Jennifer returned home after a grueling shift at the diner. The crisp autumn air nipped at her cheeks, and the sidewalks were carpeted with fiery red and gold leaves. Her arms were full, one clutching a small bag of groceries, the other balancing her well-worn nursing textbooks and purse. The weight of her routine felt unusually heavy as she climbed the steps to her modest apartment. As she reached the landing, her gaze fell on the mailbox. She rarely bothered with it, knowing it held little more than overdue bills and advertisements for local sales. But something made her pause. Adjusting her bags, she unlocked the small door. Inside, among the usual flyers and utility notices, was an envelope that immediately caught her eye. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and luxurious, a stark contrast to the usual junk mail. Her name was written across the front in flowing, elegant script. There was no return address, no hint of where it had come from. Jennifer frowned, curiosity mingling with an odd sense of apprehension. She set her bags down, her fingers brushing the smooth surface as she carefully tore it open. Inside, she found a neatly folded letter, accompanied by what appeared to be a formal document. As her eyes skimmed the letter, its contents sank in slowly. Each line brought a growing sense of disbelief, the weight of the words hitting her like an icy wind. Her heart pounded as the realization set in. This letter wasn't just unexpected, it was life-changing. The words hit Jennifer Parker like a sharp winter breeze, chilling her to the core. The letter had displayed the name of a renowned New York law firm, its bold typeface carrying a weight of authority she couldn't ignore. The letter informed her she was being summoned to court. The matter involved Nicholas Hunter, the man whose life she had saved that rainy night. Jennifer's fingers trembled as she continued reading, piecing together the details of his identity. Nicholas wasn't just anyone. He was a prominent real estate magnate, one of the wealthiest individuals in the country. The letter revealed that his accident was at the center of a legal dispute, and somehow she was now entangled in its web. She lowered herself onto the bottom step of her apartment building, her legs too shaky to carry her inside. The letter crumpled slightly in her grip as she stared at it, the world around her fading into a blur. Jennifer had barely given the man another thought since that night. She'd assumed their paths would never cross again, that her role in his life ended with the CPR she'd performed. But now, not only did she know his name, she was being dragged into a situation far beyond anything she could have imagined. Her thoughts raced in circles as she reread the letter, her pulse quickening with every word. Why had she been summoned? She had no connection to Nicholas Hunter beyond that fleeting, fateful moment on the sidewalk. She wasn't part of his high-powered world of wealth and influence. What could someone like him possibly want with her? Jennifer clutched the letter tighter, her mind swirling with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. The quiet life she'd built in Terringham suddenly felt fragile, its simplicity threatened by forces she couldn't yet comprehend. Jennifer Parker's phone buzzed in her purse, jerking her out of her thoughts. Startled, she pulled it out to see her best friend's name flashing on the screen. With a deep breath, she answered, bracing herself for what was to come. "Hey Jen, you won't believe this," Julia's voice rang through the line, bright and eager, before trailing off abruptly. "What's wrong? You sound off." Jennifer hesitated, her fingers tightening around the crumpled letter. "I just got some strange news. Remember the man I told you about? The one I helped that night?" "Of course," Julia replied, her tone instantly shifting to something more serious. "What happened? Did you hear from him?" "Not exactly," Jennifer answered, glancing around the dim hallway as though the walls were closing in on her. "I got a letter from a lawyer. Apparently he's some big-shot millionaire named Nicholas Hunter. Now I'm being called to court because of his accident." There was a stunned silence on the other end before Julia's voice broke through, her shock palpable. Wait, you're telling me the guy you saved is a millionaire? Like, An actual millionaire? That's what the letter says, Jennifer replied, disbelief creeping into her voice. But I don't understand why I'm involved. All I did was help him. Well, that explains the fancy suit, Julia remarked, though her usual humor was dulled by the weight of the situation. What are you going to do? Jennifer let out a heavy sigh, the gravity of it all pressing down on her chest. I don't know. I guess I'll have to go. It's not like I can just ignore a court summons. Words hung in the air as Jennifer's thoughts spiraled. A man she'd saved, a man she never expected to see again, was now somehow connected to her life in a way she couldn't have anticipated. And now she was bound by some invisible thread, pulled into his world in ways she wasn't sure she was prepared for. Do you want me to come with you? Julia's voice came through the phone, full of concern. You don't have to face this alone. Jennifer Parker managed a faint smile, feeling the warmth of her friend's words despite the knot tightening in her stomach. Thanks, but I think I'll be fine. I just need to figure out what this is all about. They talked for a while longer, Julia reassuring her and promising to be there if needed. After hanging up, Jennifer made her way upstairs to her apartment, the subpoena still clutched tightly in her hand. A mix of dread and curiosity gnawed at her as she ascended the stairs. The idea of stepping into a courtroom, of facing Nicholas Hunter, seemed so foreign to her. Her life in Tyringham felt light years away from his world, where skyscrapers cast long shadows over endless city streets and boardrooms dictated the fate of empires. They were worlds apart, yet here she was, inexplicably caught in his orbit. Once inside her apartment, Jennifer set the letter down on the small kitchen table, her hands trembling as she reached for it. The envelope sat there like a weight, demanding her attention. After a long pause, she slowly unfolded the document. It was a formal subpoena, summoning her to testify about the night she had saved Nicholas Hunter. Her heart skipped a beat. The date marked 2 weeks from now, far too soon, considering how little she understood of what was happening. Jennifer rested her head in her hands, feeling the gravity of it all crash down on her. She had only done what anyone would have done in her position, what her mother, Sarah, had always taught her, to help others, to be kind. Now she lay in bed with her heart pounding, full of shame and guilt and a half-truth that she knew to be false. Yet that one simple act of kindness had dragged her into a world she never wanted to be part of. She couldn't escape it now. She had saved a life, but in doing so, had unknowingly tied herself to the complications that came with it. As the evening wore on, Jennifer tried to focus on her studies, the books and notes scattered in front of her doing little to distract her mind. Thoughts of Nicholas Hunter filled the silence. What kind of man was he? A millionaire, certainly, but beyond that, he remained an enigma. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on her. The force began to get stronger, and sooner or later, she would feel it. In the dark, and deep down, Jennifer knew one thing for certain: her quiet life in Tyringham would never be the same again. The courtroom was thick with a quiet, palpable tension, every sound amplified in the stillness. The rustling of papers, the creaking of leather chairs, and the soft murmur of voices were all that could be heard, each noise seeming to stretch in the air, too loud in the silence. Jennifer Parker sat at the edge of the witness stand, her hands tightly folded in her lap, fingers trembling despite her attempts to steady them. Her heart pounded against her chest, each beat a reminder of the gravity of the moment. She hadn't imagined her life taking this turn, never thought she'd find herself here, in front of a room full of strangers, about to speak on behalf of a man whose face still haunted her thoughts. The room felt alien to her, cold, sterile, as though it belonged to a world she had never inhabited. The walls seemed to close in, the weight of the scrutiny making it hard to breathe. Jennifer's mind wandered briefly to the events that had led her here, the accident, the strange, almost surreal moment of saving his life. Nicholas Hunter. His name was still so foreign to her. He had never asked for help. In fact, he hadn't even known she existed before that night. Yet here they were, her life inextricably linked to his in ways she couldn't begin to understand. She shifted slightly, trying to maintain composure, her eyes flickering over to the defense table where Nicholas sat. His expression was unreadable, guarded. But there was something there, something that told Jennifer that this would change both their lives forever. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but this certainly wasn't it. She had acted out of instinct that night, saving a stranger without a second thought, yet now she was being called to explain it all. The weight of responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, and the words she would say felt foreign, rehearsed, and yet terribly important. Jennifer Parker sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, desperately trying to hide the tremors that betrayed her calm exterior. The courtroom felt foreign, a stark contrast to the quiet, humble streets of Tyringham she knew so well. The dark wood paneling and the solemn faces around her created a heavy atmosphere, as if she had been plucked from her ordinary life and placed in a world that didn't belong to her. Across the room, Nicholas Hunter sat with his attorneys. His presence was undeniable, exuding an effortless authority that commanded the room's attention. His navy suit, crisp and tailored, added to his imposing demeanor. But it was his face that held Jennifer's attention. There was an intensity in his expression, a subtle tension that matched her own. He watched her quietly, his eyes filled with an unspoken understanding, but she avoided meeting his gaze, focusing instead on the table in front of her. "Miss Parker," the opposing lawyer began, his tone polite but firm, "could you please recount in your own words what you witnessed the night of the incident?" Jennifer nodded, swallowing the dryness in her throat, despite the glass of water in front of her. She drew in a steadying breath, trying to steady the unease bubbling within her. "I was walking home from work," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "It was late, and the rain was pouring down. That's when I saw him, Mr. Hunter, lying on the ground." She paused, briefly glancing up at Nicholas before continuing. "At first, I thought he might have just fallen. Then I realized he wasn't breathing. I called for help and immediately began CPR until the paramedics arrived." Her words were simple, factual, yet they brought back a flood of memories. She could almost feel the cold rain seeping into her clothes again. She could hear the frantic rhythm of her hands pushing against his chest, the panic and the urgency in the air. And the street. It had been eerily silent, save for the sound of her breath and the pounding rain. It all felt as real and raw as if it had happened only moments ago. The attorney's voice was polite yet probing as he continued. "And you had no prior knowledge of who Mr. Hunter was?" "No," Jennifer replied firmly, her voice steady. "I didn't know him. I still don't, really." From his seat, Nicholas shifted slightly. Jennifer could feel his piercing gray eyes on her, even though she never dared to look directly at him. His gaze seemed to follow her every movement, heavy with unspoken words. The attorney nodded, apparently satisfied with her answer. He stepped back, momentarily allowing the tension in the room to ease, but only briefly. Then the next lawyer, this one a woman with an air of quiet authority, rose to her feet. "Ms. Parker," she began, her voice calm but firm, "thank you for your courage that night. It's no exaggeration to say that you saved Mr. Hunter's life. Were you aware of the risks involved in performing CPR?" Jennifer blinked, startled by the change in tone. She hadn't expected this kind of inquiry. "I wasn't really thinking about risks," she admitted, her voice a little softer now. "I just knew I had to do something. I couldn't leave him there." The lawyer gave a faint smile, one that seemed both appreciative and respectful. "Your actions were commendable, Ms. Parker. Not many people would have acted with such decisiveness in that moment." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the praise. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and the gaze of so many people felt almost suffocating. Yet, there was no malice in the lawyer's words, only genuine acknowledgement. And even if Jennifer wasn't ready to accept it, a part of her felt the warmth of it, deep inside. As the questioning continued, Jennifer couldn't help but notice how Nicholas was watching her intently. His expression was a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something she couldn't quite identify. When the last of the lawyers finished their round of questioning, Jennifer carefully stepped down from the witness stand, her legs unsteady beneath her. She made her way back to her seat, her heart still racing with each step, and tried to steady her breath. The trial dragged on, the air thick with legal jargon that Jennifer could barely grasp. Bits and pieces filtered through to her, details about Nicholas's accident, his complex business dealings, and the land disputes in Trinningham. Yet, all of it felt distant, almost foreign to her. She had been drawn into something much larger than she ever anticipated, and it seemed so far removed from her simple life. When the judge called for a recess, Jennifer stood, eager to leave the suffocating atmosphere of the courtroom. She gathered her things, her fingers nervously gripping the handle of her purse. As she moved toward the door, a low, measured voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Parker." She stopped, her heart jumping in her chest as she turned around. There, standing a few feet away, was Nicholas. He loomed over her slightly, his presence radiating quiet authority. In the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom, his striking features were even more pronounced. The silver strands woven through his dark hair, the sharp lines of his jaw, and the calm demeanor that spoke of years spent in control of his life. All of it struck Jennifer in a way she hadn't expected. But what caught her off guard was the softness in his expression. It was a look that seemed almost vulnerable. "Mr. Hunter?" she greeted him, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I hope you're feeling better." "I am," he replied, his tone sincere. "Thanks to you. I owe you more than I can say." Jennifer hesitated, not sure how to respond. She awkwardly waved off his gratitude. "You don't owe me anything." "And so anyone would have done the same," Jennifer murmured quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas met her gaze, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm not so sure about that," he replied. "I don't come across many people who act without expecting something in return." His words hung in the air between them, an unspoken truth that acknowledged the stark divide between their worlds. Jennifer didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded and moved past him, feeling his eyes on her, heavy and searching, as she walked away. Ordinary eye. The brisk autumn air greeted her as she stepped out of the courthouse. It was a welcome relief, offering a brief moment of solace after the suffocating atmosphere inside. But as she made her way back to Tyringham, the weight of the situation lingered. Her brief encounter with Nicholas Hunter felt like the beginning of something she couldn't fully understand, something far more complicated than she was prepared for. The next morning, Jennifer woke early, her thoughts still tangled in the events of the previous day, the pointed questions in court, the unwavering intensity of Nicholas's gaze. As she tied her apron at the diner, she found herself yearning for the stability of routine. The familiar rhythm of refilling coffee cups and chatting with regulars grounded her, offering a temporary escape from the whirlwind of emotions she couldn't shake. By mid-morning, the diner was alive with the sounds of conversation and the clink of dishes. Jennifer moved swiftly between tables, refilling drinks and scribbling orders. Just as she placed a fresh pot of coffee on the counter, the bell above the door jingled. She turned instinctively, and her body froze. Standing in the doorway, as out of place as a shadow in sunlight, was Nicholas. His dark, tailored coat only heightened the contrast between him and the small-town atmosphere of Tyringham. The chatter quieted, and heads turned, taking in the sight of the well-dressed stranger who somehow didn't belong here. His eyes scanned the room, searching for something, someone, and when they settled on Jennifer, he gave a small, almost apologetic smile. He stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Miss Parker?" he said, his voice smooth and warm, the sound carrying a note of sincerity. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Jennifer's cheeks flushed, and she set the coffee pot down with more force than necessary. Wiping her hands on her apron, she managed to compose herself. "Mr. Hunter?" she replied, her voice laced with surprise. "This is unexpected." "I owe you an apology," he said earnestly, his tone now more serious. "Yesterday, at the courthouse, I didn't get the chance to properly thank you. May I have a moment of your time?" Jennifer glanced around the diner, acutely aware of the curious stares. Old Mr. Harrowby, perched at his usual spot, raised his bushy eyebrows in silent question. Jennifer forced a polite smile, then motioned toward a quieter booth in the corner, her mind already racing with questions she didn't know how to ask. As they sat across from each other, Nicholas leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "I know this must be overwhelming for you," he began, his voice steady yet thoughtful. "It's not every day that someone like me shows up in a town like this." Jennifer kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze unwavering as she met his. "You're right," she replied calmly. "It's not. But I didn't save you for recognition or for gratitude, Mr. Hunter. I did what I thought was right." Nicholas's eyes softened, his expression sincere. "I believe you," he said quietly. "That's what makes you remarkable." Jennifer was taken aback by the warmth in his words. She had braced herself for the cool detachment she had come to expect from people like him, those who held power and wealth. Yet there was none of that arrogance in his demeanor. Instead, he seemed almost human, humbled in a way she hadn't anticipated. It was as if the boundaries of privilege had momentarily blurred. "I wanted to thank you properly," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "and to offer you something in return." Jennifer furrowed her brow, an instinctive wariness rising within her. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Hunter," she said firmly. "I'm not looking for a reward." Just as they reached the top of the steps, she pressed her hand to his arm. "It's not a reward," Nicholas reassured her, his tone gentle but insistent. "It's an opportunity. I run a charitable foundation that supports education and healthcare initiatives. After hearing about your nursing studies, I thought you might be interested in joining our team. We could really use someone with your skills and compassion." Jennifer's heart skipped a beat, the unexpected offer sending a surge of conflicting emotions through her. For a moment, the idea sounded almost too perfect, too unreal. But years of life in Tyringham, where promises were often empty and people's words were laced with hidden motives, quickly tempered her enthusiasm. She broke the news to her parents without comment and cried with her father, who reassured her it would be over in a few days. She straightened her posture, her voice measured but steady. "That's very generous of you, but why me? I'm just a waitress from Tyringham. I'm not exactly qualified to work for someone like you." "You're exactly the kind of person we need," Nicholas said, his gaze unwavering and direct. "Someone who understands what it means to put others first. From what I've seen, you're far more capable than you give yourself credit for." Jennifer paused, her mind racing. The idea of leaving Tyringham behind and stepping into a world she barely understood was as enticing as it was terrifying. A small part of her, a part that she often kept buried, felt the pull of hope, the possibility that this could be her chance. Yet doubt remained, sharp and insistent, whispering that it was too good to be true. "I appreciate the offer," she said slowly, careful not to reveal too much. "But I need some time to think it over." "I need some time to think it over," Jennifer said, her voice measured but unsure. "Of course," Nicholas replied, his tone calm and understanding. "Take all the time you need. If you decide to accept, my assistant Elliot will handle everything." Jennifer nodded, her mind clouded with uncertainty. As Nicholas stood to leave, he reached into his coat pocket and placed a small, crisp business card on the table. "No pressure," he said with a soft smile, "but I do hope you'll consider it." She watched as he left the diner, the door swinging shut with a quiet click. The room, once subdued, hummed back to life, conversations resuming. Yet Jennifer sat frozen, as if the world had shifted slightly. She stared at the card in front of her. The elegant lettering spelled out Nicholas Hunter's name, followed by his contact information. The weight of his offer pressed down on her, leaving her unable to focus on anything else. Moments later, Julia entered the diner, her eyes brightening when she saw Jennifer sitting in the corner booth. "What's going on?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from her. Jennifer sighed, holding up the card for Julia to see. "Nicholas Hunter just offered me a job," she said quietly. Julia's mouth dropped open, her excitement evident. "You're kidding. That's incredible, Jen. What kind of job is it?" "It's with his foundation," Jennifer replied, her voice cautious. "But, I don't know, Julia. It feels complicated." "Complicated?" Julia echoed, leaning in. "Jen, this is your chance. You've spent your whole life here, taking care of everyone else. Don't you think it's time to do something for yourself?" Jennifer's gaze fell back to the card, her fingers tracing the embossed name. Part of her wanted to believe Julia's words, to embrace the opportunity, but deep down, a nagging fear of the unknown kept her rooted in place. In the days that followed Nicholas's visit, Jennifer became the center of attention in Tyringham, a position she never sought. Word spread quickly through the town about the mysterious millionaire and his meeting with the town's quiet waitress. While some praised Jennifer for her heroism in saving a stranger, others whispered behind her back, speculating about Nicholas's true intentions. The gossip gnawed at her, but Jennifer kept her head down, trying to sift through the decisions before her. By the end of the week, Julia convinced Jennifer to escape the judgmental eyes and murmurs. They met by their old spot by the riverbank, a quiet haven they had frequented as children. The autumn leaves, now a patchwork of gold, orange, and brown, crunched beneath their feet as they sat down, the world feeling far away in that peaceful place. Jennifer sat by the riverbank, her eyes tracing the gentle ripples in the water, trying to quell the unease gnawing at her. The serene scene didn't quite match the whirlwind of thoughts swirling inside her. "I still can't believe you're hesitating," Julia's voice broke through the silence. With a flick of her wrist, Julia tossed a small stone into the river. It skipped once, twice, then sank beneath the surface. "If I were you, I'd have packed my bags the second he offered." Jennifer managed a faint smile, though the tension in her chest remained, her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "It's not that simple, Julia. What if this isn't the right choice? What if I leave and end up failing?" "You won't fail," Julia replied, her tone unwavering as she settled beside Jennifer. "You've faced harder challenges, Em. You've been taking care of yourself for years, working jobs most people couldn't even handle for a day. If anyone can take this on, it's you." Jennifer turned to her friend, grateful for her confidence, but still filled with doubt. "And what if people think I'm just using him? What if they think I'm just another person looking for a handout?" Julia scoffed, shaking her head. "Who cares what they think? Let them talk. The truth is, you deserve this. You've spent so much of your life putting others first. But this could be your moment. Don't let fear hold you back." A heavy sigh escaped Jennifer's lips as she stared at the water, trying to make sense of the storm of emotions inside her. She wanted to believe Julia, to trust that this could be the opportunity she'd been waiting for, but a lifetime of struggle had made her cautious. Anything that seemed too good to be true was usually just that. Her thoughts were interrupted when a familiar voice called out her name from across the park. Turning, she saw Mr. Davenport, the elderly librarian, walking toward them. His tweed jacket and matching hat made him look like a character straight out of a classic novel, and his warm smile immediately put Jennifer at ease. "Miss Parker," he greeted, tipping his hat in a charming manner. "I was hoping I'd find you here. May I have a word?" "Of course, Mr. Davenport," Jennifer replied, standing to greet him. As she did, Julia gave her a playful wink and wandered off to give them some space. Mr. Davenport leaned on his cane, his sharp blue eyes watching Jennifer with a mix of curiosity and concern. "I heard about your visitor earlier this week," he began, his voice soft. "Quite a stir for a town like Terringham, isn't it?" Jennifer nodded, bracing herself for the usual round of questions or unsolicited advice. But instead, Mr. Davenport's tone softened even more. "I don't claim to know Nicholas Hunter," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But I do know you. You've always done right by the people here, even when it was difficult. That's a rare quality, Miss Parker, one that shouldn't be overlooked." Jennifer was caught off guard by his words. She hadn't expected such direct praise, especially from someone as reserved as Mr. Davenport. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure of how to respond, "but I'm not sure what to do. His world feels so different from mine. I don't know if I even belong there." Mr. Davenport nodded thoughtfully, tapping his cane against the ground. "Belonging's a curious thing," he mused. "It's not about where you come from or what you have. It's about what you bring to the table. If this man sees something in you, something worth inviting into his world, then perhaps you should trust that." Jennifer blinked, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. She had spent so much of her life questioning her own worth, doubting her place in the world. The idea of someone like Nicholas Hunter seeing something in her, something worth bringing into his high-powered world, felt almost impossible to accept. Yet, for the first time, it didn't seem entirely out of reach. "Just think on it," Mr. Davenport said, offering her a kind smile. "And remember, it's not every day someone gets the chance to change their life." As he walked away, Jennifer returned to her spot by the river, her mind racing with all the possibilities Mr. Davenport's words had stirred. Julia rejoined her, raising an eyebrow at Jennifer's thoughtful expression. "What did he say?" Jennifer shook her head, still processing. "He thinks I should consider the offer?" Julia grinned, her eyes lighting up. "Well, there you have it. Mr. Davenport is the wisest man in Terringham. If he thinks it's a good idea, you'd better listen." Jennifer chuckled softly, though the knot of uncertainty in her chest hadn't loosened. She spent the rest of the afternoon with Julia, their conversation drifting to lighter topics, but the weight of the decision lingered in her mind, settling heavily with each passing minute. That evening, Jennifer sat alone in her small apartment, the quiet hum of the night surrounding her. She stared at the business card Nicholas had left. She picked it up slowly, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to leave Terringham behind. The thought was terrifying, but beneath the fear there was a flicker of something else, something exhilarating. She placed the card back on the table, a sense of resolve beginning to take root. Whatever choice she made, it wouldn't come from fear. It would come from the quiet certainty that she was ready for something more. For the first time in years, Jennifer felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibilities she had never allowed herself to dream of before. The weight of the decision settled on Jennifer like a heavy cloak, its pressure constant, never letting up. The days seemed to blur together, filled with work, studying, and sleepless nights. The business card Nicholas Hunter had left sat on her kitchen table, a silent but persistent reminder of the opportunity she had yet to face. At the diner, whispers followed her as she moved between tables. The people of Terringham, as kind as they often were, couldn't help but speculate. Some admired her courage for saving Nicholas, while others wondered if she might be using her connection to advance her own interests. "You're becoming quite the local legend, Jennifer," Julia teased one afternoon, breaking the silence as they sat on the back steps of the diner during a rare lull. Julia's playful grin was evident as she bit into a crisp apple. "Next thing you know, they'll name a sandwich after you." Jennifer managed a small laugh, but her expression remained distracted. "I didn't ask for any of this, Julia," she said softly. "I just want to live my life without feeling like I'm being watched all the time." Julia nudged her gently. "You can't let what people think control you. They're going to talk no matter what, so you might as well do what feels right for you." Jennifer let out a long sigh, the weight of her internal struggle making her shoulders sag. "It's not just what they think," she said quietly. "It's what this could mean for me." "And if I say yes," Jennifer continued, her voice low, "it's not just a job. It's a total upheaval of everything I've ever known." She paused, her thoughts momentarily drifting. "And if I say no," her words trailed off, fear of making the wrong choice gnawing at her. Julia leaned back against the old wooden railing, her tone soft but firm. "You've spent so much of your life playing it safe, Jennifer. Maybe it's time to take a chance. You've earned it." Jennifer nodded, though the knot in her stomach remained tight. She couldn't deny Julia's logic, but stepping into Nicholas Hunter's world still felt overwhelming. His life was beautiful, certainly, but it seemed filled with complexities and hidden challenges. That evening, as Jennifer walked home beneath the pink and orange hues of the setting sun, she decided to take a moment for herself. She veered onto the longer path through the park, where the crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves. Laughter from the playground drifted through the air, a sound that reminded her of the simplicity she loved about Terringham, a town where every face was familiar, and each street held memories. But as she turned a corner, her tranquil walk was interrupted by a sight that made her heart race. A group of familiar faces gathered near the gazebo, their voices drifting on the cool evening breeze. Jennifer caught fragments of their conversation, her name slipping into their words more than once. "She's probably looking for a way out," one woman said, her voice thick with suspicion. "Can't blame her, really, but it's hard to trust someone who gets that kind of attention." Another voice joined in, quieter but no less pointed. "Maybe she's just taking advantage of his gratitude. You know how people get when there's money involved." Jennifer froze, the sharpness of their words landing like an icy slap. She hadn't realized how far the town's gossip had spread, or how much doubt had settled in among those she once called friends, her neighbors. She turned away quickly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment, and hurried home. Once inside the quiet sanctuary of her apartment, Jennifer sat at the kitchen table, the business card Nicholas had given her resting heavily in her hand. The weight of others' judgment pressed against her, but she knew she couldn't allow their whispers to decide her future. This was her life, her future to shape, and she refused to let anyone else control her path. Still, the fear of the unknown lingered. Nicholas's offer was undeniably generous, but it felt like a lifeline thrown into a current she wasn't sure she was ready to navigate.